hope to get there, by having breakfast with them. So I thought we just I want you guys to have a chance just to ask whatever questions you have. I thought I'd just talk about a few things sleep-wise. The question always comes up, why do we need sleep? Because every organism on the planet needs sleep or they die. And you can look at all kinds of organisms around, dogs, cats, not just people, even birds. They can sleep when they're flying because their brain splits, so they can sleep. One side of their brain sleeps, the other side stays awake. Same with dolphins. So everything needs sleep, even at the cellular level. So we need it for some reason to live, but as people, we need it to perform, right? If we don't sleep well, we end up performing poorly the next day. The things our parents knew right away, because what happens if you don't get enough sleep for whatever reason? You end up with, your parents were right? You better watch it, you'll get sick. What's the first thing that happens? The things that defend us from infection quit working. So you get infection, and when these high school kids, what happens? Their skin breaks out, they start having apnea and all these sorts of things. So we know we need it for some reason for optimal function during the day physiologically. We also need it for our personalities. I mean, most people in here, because they're good Griffins, they're business people, successful business people, I might add. And so when you're working with other people, sometimes people who don't get enough sleep, they become irritable and difficult to deal with, or that happens to ourselves. And so we want to be aware of that. So I would just make it that simple. There's three main things we need for good sleep day to day, most of us. There's three systems in our body. So one system is our daily lives. That helps frame our sleep time, because our internal time clock, believe it or not, is about 24 and a half hours. So we need something to constantly recenter our sleep cycle. So our daily life does that. Light, our schedule, having to be at the office, all those having to be at the diner, all the things that we do that keep us centered, right? Then the other system is what we call our homeostatic system. So if you think about your sleep or your wakefulness as a pitcher of water. When you sleep all night, the pitcher gets filled up. All day, you pour out your wakefulness, like we're doing now. We're getting towards the end of the day, so don't anybody pour all their water out now. But when you get to the end of the day, your pitcher is empty, you're sleepy again, time for you to go to sleep. Most of us understand those two big things. The third thing, which is really common but not as well understood by many, is what we call our circadian rhythm. And if you remember the oscilloscope that used to be in our time, Brother Burkholder's office, I don't know who's the physics teacher now, but they have the oscilloscope, right? We have that sort of thing. The circadian rhythm has 2 peaks of wakefulness, 2 peaks of sleepiness. It's locked into our brain. It comes out of a little pea-sized organ right behind the bridge of our nose, feeds off of light. And peak wakefulness normally is late morning, late afternoon. Peak sleepiness, mid-afternoon. There was a little thing called the siesta in the old world, which was designed around that. And about 4 a.m. So anybody here ever worked the night shift? Yeah, so when you work the night shift, right? Like we'd be in the emergency room working the night shift, 4 or 5 in the morning, it'd be 100 degrees outside. The nurses are walking around wearing those long surgical gowns because they're so chilled. Because when it's time, when you're sleepy, your core body temperature tends to drop about a degree or so. So it'd be hot outside, everybody'd be chilled, and you have an overwhelming desire to sleep. So that's what the rhythm is. What happens is, if we don't go to bed and get up about the same time each day, that circadian rhythm can be what we call misaligned with our daily schedule. Remember, the first system. What's a practical thing? This is what causes jet lag. So if we went to Spirit, got on Mark's private jet, we could get over to France right away. And so over in Europe, it's 6 or 7 hours or 8 hours ahead of us. So they're already going to bed or in bed. We're not ready for bed. So our peak sleepiness isn't there yet. So that's why when you suddenly go into a different time zone, it's difficult either staying awake or going to sleep because your circadian system's still not lined up. It takes about a day for every 2 time zones to get it lined up, right? So that's believe it or not, this is a huge issue in professional sports. The Olympic teams, they all have some sleep consulting that goes on with how they're doing this. They've studied performance when these professional teams or college teams have to go to the West or the East Coast. And this guy's very serious. So those are just a couple kind of daily things that I think are interesting. But that's one of the main reasons when people come to see us, one of the first things we try to do is tie down, most importantly, their wake time and get them some bright light in the morning. Why? That little organ behind your eyes where your optic nerves cross, that light in the morning helps, believe it or not, set your bedtime. So if you have to do one single thing, it's to set your wake time. That'll help fix your bedtime. And try to stick to that most of the time if you can. The biggest two things we see with people that say I'm sleeping poorly is they don't have a fixed wake time and bedtime. I saw 3 people like this today. They're all healthy people, but their bedtimes and wake times are widely varying every night. And part of it's just life, high-powered jobs, social life, all that kind of stuff. Some nights I go to bed at 10, sometimes I can't go to bed till 2 in the morning because of work, etc., right? So we kind of work with them on that. That's one of the biggest things. The other thing, which is a very interesting thing, I've got a wonderful PhD who's worked with me for years and just a wonderful fellow who's also boarded in sleep medicine, is when we talk to folks, the other single biggest issue they do, what do we do if we learn a new task, right? If we're going to play a new sport, train dogs, whatever it is, what do you do to get better? Right. Sleep is the one activity that practice makes worse, right? Because you don't do sleep, you enter sleep. And so the more you try to do it, the worse you do it, right? So that's a key issue. So what happens to folks with all the good intentions, by the time they get to us after several years or maybe decades, is they're lying in bed. Because I'm not sleeping very well, I'll just stay in bed longer. Their time in bed becomes longer and longer and longer, and they're sleeping more poorly all the time. They're sleeping what we call less efficiently. So we actually paradoxically start to narrow down how much time they spend in bed. So those just a kind of couple inside baseball, so to speak, things, and I can open it up to questions. I brought a few things just to show y'all. So a common thing, a lot of people think that all we do is take care of a disorder called obstructive sleep apnea. It's certainly one of the common things we see. Apnea stands for lack of breathing for 10 seconds or longer when you're sleeping because your air pipe gets obstructed. I brought this, I had our great team, and I'm really so fortunate to have such a great team. This is just to show you how easy it is to do a sleep study. This is all there is to a home sleep apnea test. This little red thing, in the pouch here are a black belt that go around here and around here. They hook to this little red computer. This is a little looks like an oxygen tubing that goes under your nose, and then a little clip on your finger to measure your oxygen level. That's it. We fit you for it. You put it on at bedtime, you wear it, you put it back in the little case, and you drop it off at one of our locations. Within a few hours, we have it scored up and we'll have an answer for you. So that we do about 70-80% of patients that way. This is my good friend, the head. He gave it up for us. He's a hell of a guy. During my tenure at the National Sleep Foundation, this is one of the products that our committee ended up coming up with. It was a spectacular success. They sold none of them. And so they ended up basically giving them away recently, so I got some of them. In any case, it's a very interesting model, so the head's a good guy. And this kit was great during the time of all these video visits. So this is the normal side of the head. This is for obstructive sleep apnea, to show you that it's just an anatomy problem. This big red thing is the tongue. And in the normal patient, air comes through over the palate and the tongue right down the trachea or the breathing pipe. But in some people, when they breathe in, remember our definition, there's the tongue. When the air comes in, the back of the throat obstructs or collapses and blocks the breathing pipe. That's all obstructive sleep apnea is. It isn't anything more exotic than that. It is just an engineering problem. So if you think about listening to the When you turn the water on in your sink and you hear the water go through the trap, that is the sound of turbulent water flow. All snoring is the sound of turbulent airflow. Our best patients are sheet metal workers, plumbers, engineers, machinists. They get it, right? If you don't make the elbow right, you get lots of noise. So that's all snoring is. Snoring is a sign you might have sleep apnea. To carry that analogy further, if you kink or block up the drain, the trap, then now you have apnea because you have no air movement. That makes any questions? That makes some sense? It's kind of helped to see it visually. And so our job, there's lots of different ways we can do this. Many of them are with what we call a positive airway pressure device, which we were talking about earlier. But the goal is to convert you from that to that, one way or the other. One way is to pressurize that. Another way is to pull the tongue forward with various technologies. Now there's actually even another way, which is there's a device that will strengthen for mild sleep apneas, actually strengthen the tongue muscle so it won't collapse, which is kind of an interesting technology. So there's all kinds of interesting technologies out there. Yes, sir?
Question. So what happens sometimes if you eat or drink certain things like alcohol? You know, some people never snore, but then they drink alcohol and they snore. How does that affect the tongue to block things?
Great question. So things that cause you to have relaxed muscles, so alcohol or muscle relaxers like Valium or things that people take like if they have a bad back, they cause the muscles to relax. And the biggest muscle that relaxes is the tongue, and then also the muscles in the back of the throat. The back of the throat, it's really a very cool part of the body because there's many muscles, small, strong muscles in a really small area. So if those muscles start to relax a little bit while you're sleeping and they fall back, they don't have much room to fall. And so that alcohol is the classic thing. It causes a little muscle relaxation and you get narrowing, and now you have turbulent airflow, so you've got noise. And also, the alcohol dulls your senses a little bit, so your brain doesn't quite respond as rapidly to that stimulus of the narrowed airway. So you get kind of a double whammy going there. It's actually one of the questions or the risk factors we put when we take the history. So I know that none of that happens with any of us here, but I have heard of it happening.
Ryan wants to know about cocaine.
Other questions?
Cocaine.
So you always hear like 7.5 to 9 hours or whatever is the optimum sleep, and you marry that with trying to go and do as much as you can. What is optimal sleep? And then second part of that is in those REM stages. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard like 1.5-hour increments are kind of where you hit those peak REM pieces. So is it better to have 7.5 hours versus 8.5 or?
Great question. It's probably the single most common question that we get travel around. So one, there is variability in how much sleep you need based on your age, like generationally. So there's a great graphic. If you go to the Sleep Foundation website, I think it's sleepfoundation.org, the National Sleep Foundation published a great graphic on this, which was a research paper, so the kind of the sleep times. But what they gave were ranges based on age. But for all of us, basically, middle-aged people by and large, the quoted time is going to be around 7:30, 7:40 minutes, 7 hours and 30 or 40 minutes. But it's a range of times. Because here's the real secret, right? The day our parents conceived us, it was written in our genes how much sleep we needed, each of us, to be rested. That's very difficult to figure that out. So that's the average of all the data. So you're right on, right, that's it. That's about the range. But each person's a little different. And it's a bell-shaped curve. So that the middle of the curve, that's where that number is. It's like a grading scale, right? So in this case, we all sort of want to be C students, but on either end of that curve, about 1% of people can be existing on 6 hours of sleep or less. And on the other end, we call those short sleepers, and they aren't guys who just look like me that are short. But so there, and then there's the long sleepers that are over 10 hours, which, believe it or not, is really a tough biological draw. Because folks who are long sleepers, it's tough. So if they don't get that much sleep, they're quite tired all the time. And those who do succeed in budgeting that into their lives, I've seen significant marital arguments in my office when we start having couples that one of them has to sleep 10 or 11 hours to feel rested. There's a lot of navigating that has to go on there. So that's kind of the biological answer. The smart answer is the only thing you can do is do what you're doing. Structure, try to give yourself about 7.5 or 8 hours of sleep opportunity a night at a minimum. And if you really want to know, a great thing to do is when you become semi-retired, is you can go on multiple long vacations and then really allow yourself to have good sleep structure, but sleep longer to a point where you're like, I feel really great. And I've noticed that my optimal time to feel really great is 7 hours and 15 minutes, or it's 8.5 hours. One last thing, because I could go on about this for a long time, but they used to do this. They don't do it anymore because it's really expensive. They're basically sleep satiation tests. So they had places built that were completely devoid of any light, like it's a research hotel rooms, and they put people in there and let them live. They supply them with all their food, but give them no external cues. So they would just, go to bed, sleep. They keep them in that rhythm, but they'd find out exactly how much they'd sleep so they could feel rested and they come up with their time. But you're right on the money. And it's a great thing to look at because it'll tell you a little bit about your kids,
Right.
And give you the ranges. And so we do see that. Great. Thanks for asking that, Brian. Johnny.
Yeah, this has to do with daylight saving time. I've heard they're maybe going to try to get everybody on daylight saving time the whole year round. I've heard arguments, well, there should be more standard time because of the sleep rhythms. What's kind of your take on that?
It's a complicated thing. The Academy of Sleep Medicine has taken the position that they think we should not have changes in daylight to standard time all the time, that we should try to go on standard time. That's they feel that that's the best, most stable biological rhythm. There is certainly some debate about that, and we'll kind of see where the lawmakers come down, because of course the lawmakers are prone to make the most clear judgment of any issue such as that. So, but the official position of the academy is to go to standard time. Yeah, and I think what everybody, or not everybody, I shouldn't use that term, but what folks in the field, their sense is what we should do for sure is we probably don't have a need to keep changing back and forth.
Sure.
So to some degree, it's that they need to pick one, right? But the standard time one, you're exactly right, is what's considered the optimal at this point for a variety of people. Other stuff? Any?
I've lots of questions.
I have a question.
All right.
Okay, what about naps?
Uh,
So if you take a nap,
There we go.
do you think it messes with your sleep at night?
So naps are interesting. I'm kind of a guy who likes naps, but you have to do it in the right setting. So kind of go back to your basic stuff, which is that, again, when your parents conceived you, you got allocated so much sleep you need per 24 hours. How you choose to get that is really sort of up to you. And so from a biological perspective, if you only get like 6 hours of sleep and you need to get a nap, who does that? Night shift workers, things like moms, right? So if you want to supplement your allocation of sleep and add that on, now that's not a bad thing. The problem with naps can become if you don't do it in a stable way. We have people that naps are an issue, so we try to get them to schedule their naps. I was talking to a researcher today he's a CEO, and he's like, I'm so tired in the afternoon. We just scheduled him a 20-minute, 30-minute afternoon nap at 2 o'clock every day. He's gold, right? That you just schedule it. When it can cut into your sleep is if people start taking random late afternoon naps, then they can't get to sleep because what do? They filled their water pitcher up with some more energy, right? Now they got to dump it all out again. Well, instead of going to bed at 10, now I'm going to bed at midnight. And now I got to still get up at 6 a.m. I'm tired. So what happens the next day? You get home from work and you take another nap, but now it's a longer nap, and now you can't get to bed till 1 a.m. And then off to the races we go. So naps in the right setting can be very helpful. If they're not done in a way that's organized, then they can be problematic. But short naps can be extremely energizing. When you study naps, people go into REM sleep right away, and they do feel energized by it. The other thing is there's a thing called polyphasic sleep, where we do monophasic sleep now, right? We go to bed, we get up. One mono sleep period. But there's very good evidence, and going back as far as Shakespeare, that people used to wake up in the middle of the night. They called it first and second sleep. And they'd get up, maybe have a tea. Some people would even have a meal with their kids. These are the times before electricity. They'd have like a little low fire, some candlelight, get up, maybe be up for a while, and then go back and sleep the second part. They'd be getting the same total amount of sleep, but it would be in at least 2 separate chunks, right? So there was a really famous guy who no one could find, but I roped him in, and we brought him here to St. Louis twice. Very interesting guy. And he did this. So do you know what solo sailors are? This is so fun. So these guys are like NBA rock superstars in Europe. They sail from the south of France all the way down to the Southern Ocean, Antarctica, and back by themselves. If any other person gets on the boat, they're done. And some of them die. Okay? So it takes like months to do this. There's a really good book called God-Forsaken Sea by a guy named Lundy. You can get it on Amazon used for like $1. This fellow's in it. He was the advisor for these guys. And so hull speed, when the sailing boat is sailing, normal sailing conditions, 20 minutes is how long you're safe. So he teaches these sailors how to nap for like 3 months to stay safe. And they chart all their naps to the point when they're in like where the icebergs are, they're napping for minutes at a time. So that gives you an idea. And there's no real use for this sort of skill, except if you're a first responder and a building's collapsed and you don't unearth somebody, they'll be dead, right? Or you're in a military campaign, or you're cleaning rubble at 9/11 or whatever. There is some evidence that, those guys don't need to go home and get 8 hours of sleep. Get a quick nap. And so they do use it in the military and first responders. It's more than you probably wanted for, but it's kind of fun. Any other stuff? Yeah, Rick?
So, just anecdotally, as I look at some of our young men here at Vianney, and I think it's pretty widespread, young people are not getting enough sleep, just in general. And there's so many things that, social media, video game stuff, just reasons for them to be up. Do you have a lot of young people that come to see you? And how do you kind of get them motivated to try and get more sleep?
So we do have young people who come to see us. Most of them, so not getting enough sleep is called insufficient sleep syndrome, right? Those people basically don't come to see us. Parents will bring children to see us because they're either not performing, they're having trouble staying awake, they're having other medical and psychological problems, but it can be very challenging. Some of that stuff tends to get better in some circumstances when the kids get away, but a lot of it's just structure. But there's usually other secondary issues at play. It is epidemic. A couple years ago, I was up at the NCAA. They put together a task force to look at sleep in athletes, and they've written a position paper along these lines. And one of the data points that came out was that the college athletes were sleeping like 6.25, 6.5 hours a night. And there was all kinds of rumination about like what to do about that until they presented the data about the regular college students who weren't athletes. And they were only sleeping 6 hours a night. So there's just a general issue maybe of that age. Also, there maybe isn't as much appreciation for the sleep health connection at that point of our lives, and they're not feeling repercussions. I will share that it's been very helpful for us with the young people when Phelps, the swimmer, Tom Brady, Brady came out, he's like 40 or 42 now. Is that how old he is? Mm-hmm. When he was around 25, I don't know if you guys remember this, he came out, he was a wild man. And then he kind of looked in the mirror and said, I really like this. I want to do this when I'm older. So he became committed to what would it take for him to compete at the highest physical level later in his life. I don't know Tom Brady, I have no relationship with him, but I'm very thankful for him for doing this, for whatever, is he made a statement and said, I am going to commit now to do the things that are going to allow me to do this in 15 or 20 years. And one of the 3 things he outlined was to sleep, to really commit and choose to sleep in a healthy way. And that was huge for us. The same with Michael Phelps. I don't know if you saw the interview. We love this interview. He was at one of the Olympic Games, and one of the interviews, because they're always trying to get a good quote, right? Said, well, what are you going to be doing, Michael? Implying, you're going and partying your brains out. He goes, I'm only doing 3 things, and that's all I'm doing every day. Swimming, eating, and sleeping. It's like, okay, just can that quote. We'll play it at every event, and then here you got. I think he's won the most gold medals of anybody, right, or something like that. So, I guess my point is, it's helpful to start. Young people are especially amenable to those sorts of role models. We tell folks look, we get it. We're not going to be Tom Brady or Michael Phelps, but if it's important to them to function at that level, it's important for us to be able to function at running businesses, running companies, schools, all this sort of thing. So, it's an epidemic. And the electronics in the bedroom at night are literally an epidemic. We did one unpublished study in a rural town in Missouri. I mean, it's moved into the late grade school, junior high level, where kids are sleeping with their phones. Very, very disruptive. So, and none of us have a solution to that, except it's kind of like the Just Say No campaign, right? You somehow got to get them out of the bedroom, and it's very challenging. You see kids roll. I mean, my kids do it too. They roll over, ding. Oh yeah, that's great. It's 2 a.m. Like, who's texting you, and why are you answering that? But we got to do the best we can. Other questions? Certainly a pertinent one. That's all. You guys are bored to death.
How much influence, I mean, obviously in the medical industry, but how much influence do you have? Because I hear of the mass benefits of quality sleep from disease states, from just being functional, and it seems like it's this much, it's a very tiny percentage of attention that's being paid to the quality of what a good night's rest, over time does. How much influence are you and your counterparts having on the medical community as a whole in terms of the health of the overall, reliance upon pharmaceuticals and how, you look at these growing disease states and how these continue to, how can we manage it better by getting better sleep?
Yeah, there's all kinds, there's 3 or 4 really cool things in that one question. So I think one, if you look at the sort of the sleep story as a health promotion issue, so there's a shifting. The issue is sleep issues as sleep disorders and diseases, and sleep as health, right? You're really saying what about that? So think about, history is a wonderful thing to sort of help us encapsulate it. So think about water, right? If you go back, a bunch of you guys know that I've been privileged to do a lot of, travel with military people. If you look at water, when these guys got their canteens in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they got a canteen. If they asked for more water, they were the weakest humans ever. Now they're hauling water all over because hydration is now the thing, not deprivation, right? You can't go to a kid's soccer game or softball game or baseball game. My God, I mean, they bring gallons of water for a 30-minute practice. So, we have this whole issue. We were traveling somewhere. One of my sons, some Australian fellow, said to him, "What's with you Americans and all this hydration stuff? Why do you always carry water around?" So it took several decades for that transition to happen. Right after water came what? Cholesterol. So cholesterol started in the 80s with, it looks like high cholesterol correlates with coronary disease. Therefore, we're going to develop medicine to lower cholesterol and maybe lower heart disease. And that over a period of 15 or 20 years turned into what? Low-fat diets, healthy eating. Now that's all part of the culture, right? Eating healthy, it's turned into sort of the food movement of today. So I would propose to you that sleep's kind of in the third inning of that ball game. Sleep went from being like all sleep disorders 15 years ago maybe, to now we're having the conversation of, hey, yeah, let's take care of sleep problems, sleep apnea, insomnia, some of the other things we don't touch on tonight, but those disorders, let's talk about how healthy sleep habits and sleep behaviors can enhance and prolong your life and be what we call the big three, right? Diet, exercise, and sleep. If you do those three things, you got a really good chance. So what are we doing? There's a thing called the True Health Initiative. I'm on the board. It was created by the head of public health from Yale. And so you're like, why would they ever, any board that would have me has to not be a good board. But why are you there, right? Well, those are the first three things. What are the next two things? Items number 4 and 5, long, loving relationships and sleep. So those are the top 5 things that help you have a long, healthy life. So organizations like that are raising and trying to change culture and change behavior, those are some of the things that are happening. So this just takes a while, right? Kids now, eventually, they're going to be getting to be 25, 30, and they're probably going to start investing in those parts of their life as they go forward because they realize they're not quite as bulletproof as they think. And that's youth. Thank God for them. Right? There's more. I can't remember what else.
Well, and just, I think you spoke to it somewhat, but just that influence in the medical community as a whole in terms of education and disease states. And
so in that medical community, it is clearly percolating through. So things like most people have heard, like with heart disease, like there's a thing called atrial fibrillation, where your heart doesn't beat right. All those people now have to have sleep studies if they have atrial fibrillation. Contributed to heart disease, elevated blood sugars, high blood pressure. So more and more and more physicians that are involved in those areas know that under certain circumstances, we need to get this checked out. Depression, anxiety. Psychiatrists are very plugged in to that issue. I was in Salt Lake Monday speaking to the American College of Occupational Medicine. They're a huge convention. Well, you have workplace issues, drivers, for safety purposes, if they have any issues, they have to be tested. There's a whole set of guidelines and rules as it relates to that and what we have to do about it. So it is making its way through society. And rest assured, from a safety perspective, pilots, people who operate heavy equipment, there's a whole set of rules around it.
doctors, just
Right.
how long they're on a shift or
Right, all that stuff. The problem is, when you deal with doctors, they'll shorten your work shift, and then what do doctors do? They go pick up secret shifts so they make more money. Because they're young, right? It was really fun. We were going over to teach, and we were going to New Zealand to teach, and the captain of the flight, one of the guys who flies that route lives here in St. Louis. He's a patient. And so he goes, "Are you going this year again?" Because I go, "Yeah, I'm going." He checked it. He goes, "I'm not on that flight. But let me tell the captain," I go, "I really would like to see the sleeping rooms." Because on some of the planes, they just have them sleep in, you guys have probably seen this, they'll put these huge blankets they put them up so the pilots, they have to rotate. And so they'll put a place for them to sleep. But on some of the newer planes, they actually have little sleeping rooms. And the Dreamliner, the 787, has those, and that's the flight. So anyway, I get on there's a whole funny story around it, but I get on the plane, and they took me to the sleeping rooms. They're like a split level. So if you go to the front of the plane, like where the commodes are, and they're giving out the sodas and refreshments, you go in there and you just turn, there's just a nondescript door. It looks like a lavatory door on a plane, but it doesn't have anything on it. You open it up, and it's like a split level house. You just go up like half. It's not the whole height of the plane. You go up like halfway, and they have beds in there. The guys have to dive in there. They're only like this big. And these guys go in there for like a 12-hour flight. They only can fly the plane for a few hours at a time, and then they have to go lie down and so forth and so on. When you go, truck drivers now, they have all this monitoring equipment that, you know, these individuals, truck drivers, it's a huge societal issue for all of us that we don't think we're gonna face it, but we are facing it. There's a huge shortage of truck drivers already, and sleep is a huge issue for the drivers. When I was speaking Monday, I was coming back from Kansas City at 4 a.m, Good Friday. So many, and these truck drivers, in my view, they're heroes in our society in many regards, even though maybe some of us don't respect them as much as we should. But they're giving up their health frequently to move the things across our country that make our country work every day. And there's fewer and fewer of them. And so Highway 70 from Kansas City to here is a solid line of drivers driving, and it's 4 a.m. God bless them. You know, but they're having to stop, and they have to sleep so much. They can only drive so long. They have ways of monitoring them. So these are tough jobs we're asking our fellow citizens. So your very point, there's going to be decisions we have to make as a society that sleep's going to be a factor. And I think it's good for us to talk about that and recognize it. But I certainly admire guys that are doing it. It's tough. Anybody else? I brought a few brochures because I want you guys to truly be bored. So please, you know, take them if you're interested, and if not, they'll make good fodder for Rick to have a bonfire. It's always
We
great.
don't burn anything around here, there's nothing I know about.
It's always great fun to be up here on campus, so I'm honored to be here and look forward to visiting with you a bit.
Thank you, Joe.
Have the answer.